Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this Behaviour Change Briefing, part of an event series from Claremont. Minorities, hard to reach, harder to reach, less heard, seldom heard, misheard, heard not heard. There are so many terms, it's all very confusing. In this very special event, we'll be looking at how the UK's leading organisations have developed effective ways to reach those who are often overlooked. We'll be asking, why do we need to stop using the term hard to reach? How do we create work that's truly inclusive? And how can lived experiences improve the way that we communicate? We'll be hearing from leaders in the field to better understand how they engage with underrepresented and seldom heard groups. I'm very pleased to introduce my panelists. Panelists, if you could go on to video now, like magic. I must confess that we have been wrestling as a team with the technical controls before this event, but hopefully we're going to be all right. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our panelists here today. I'll start with Maddie and Barbara. They are representing the campaign We Are Undefeatable, one of the campaigns that we most admire in the last few years. Maddie works for Age UK. Barbara works for Insight Angels, who are the lead evaluator of the campaign. Both incredibly experienced, very, very lucky to have you. Madeleine has worked works currently as a senior brand marketing manager at Age UK, a media specialist, previously worked at UK TV and Virgin Media. Barbara has over 20 years of experience advising public and private sector organisations on consumer behaviour in areas including physical activity and sport and travel and retail. Moving on, we've got Dominic and Taku from the Terrence Higgins Trust, an incredible British charity, a success story, a leader in the sector. They provide services relating to HIV and sexual health. Dominic joined the marketing team, get this, in 1999. Now, in marketing communications terms, that's about 1 million years. It's like dog years, but 1 million years, incredible. Again, thank you, Dominic, for joining us. Taku is also joining us. Taku is the head of social marketing. He's responsible for managing the delivery of England's national HIV prevention programme. Taku's team is behind the National HIV Testing Week and the It Starts With Me campaign, and they have been incredibly busy last few weeks where their campaign has been live. Thank you, both of you, for joining us. I cannot wait to hear what you're going to tell us. We also have Julian Crockford, is the Chief Programmes Officer of Villiers Park Educational Trust. Hello, Julian, give us a wave. A national charity which empowers less advantaged, bright young people to succeed and become leaders in their field through their unique programmes, very much embedded in local communities. Julian's going to be taking us through their work, and we will see how he is passionate about social mobility and improving access for socially disadvantaged and underrepresented groups. An incredible panel. No doubt it is partly the quality of the panel, as well as the subject matter, which has led to this being our most popular event yet. We have had over 300 registrants as of this morning. What's our latest number? 311 registrants for this event, which is almost 100 more than any other events that we have done. And it's testament to the speakers, it's testament to the subject matter. I think it's also testament to the fact that a lot of people are looking for advice and best practice and a steer on how to do better with this. What we have seen as a company is increased interest in how to do this right, increased inquiry about how to do this right, particularly after, I should say, the BLM surge, what was it, last year? That really triggered an increase in in sense of responsibility, certainly for me and my company, that we need to do better on this. And we really accepted that we're on a journey with this. So it's no surprise to me that we've got an incredible number of people joining us today. I'm going to start with just a few words on Claremont, why we're doing this event, our own journey. And then we're going to start with a pre-recorded interview, just a few minutes, with the, Stephen Bediako, OBE, a pioneer in this field, a leader in this area. Stephen has got many different hats that he wears. He's a trustee on prestigious boards. He's the chairman of an organisation called the Social Innovation Partnership. But first and foremost, he's just an incredible thinker on issues of this nature. So we're going to start with my pre-recorded interview I did with him. The reason it's pre-recorded is because he's on the west coast of America and we didn't want to drag him out of bed at 2 a.m. So I even wore the same jumper and sat in the same place so that we could slot in this pre-recorded video. You may notice things have moved in the background between now and when I play the video, and we'll send out prizes for anyone who can put the differences into the chat. But before we do that, I would like to just say literally just a few words about our own journey on this subject before I hand over to our first speaker, which will be the team from We Are Undefeatables. Just going to check with my panelists. Have I missed anything? Is that all right? Can you give us a thumbs up if we're basically, everything's okay? I'm not making terrible mistakes. I'm going to share screen so I can just put one or two slides up. Panelists, if you would like to at this stage go off camera, you're very welcome to. Can I check that you can see my white screen okay? Yeah. Okay. We are Claremont. We're a communications agency working in social change. We've been running for just over 13 years. Most of our clients are non-profit. We work in public sector and charities mainly, but also with some incredible brands and private sector companies as well. What we have found is that ever since starting the agency, and even before that, this term hard to reach came up all the time. Most campaigns, which are funded by taxpayers or funded from charity donations, have a responsibility to include everybody and include a wide range of people. Where it was quite often clients would come to us where they have a clear handle on the easy stuff, the low-hanging fruit, for want of a better expression, and they would say, hey, you know, how do we get through? How do we do better with these particular minorities or seldom heard voices? And so across the organizations that you can see here, I would say that over 3/4 in one way or another, these organizations have asked us to make sure that to help them to include these types of audiences. I picked out 4 examples of very recent work that we have done where we have learned a lot. We've inevitably probably made mistakes as well, but we've definitely learned a lot in our practice about what works. On the left is the work that we are just completing with the Ministry of Housing in relation to Grenfell Tower. Specifically, our brief was to engage local communities around the tower, to have conversations and include less heard voices about the future of the site. Specifically, what would a memorial be like for the fire and the people that died in that disaster at Grenfell? What would that memorial be like? Where there was the Ministry of Housing was very aware that we could hear from the loudest voices very easily, but how do we include young people? How do we include people with barriers to participation, particularly in the middle of the pandemic? And I'm very proud of the work that we did with our partner Kaizen to use street teams in a very sophisticated way to do proactive outreach into communities, into the corners and the nooks and crannies of the Grenfell Tower communities, to hear what they've got to say on their own terms. Johnny Zander, the very inspiring owner of Kaizen, our partner, uses this expression of fish where the fish are. And that's what drove our work in relation to Grenfell. Save the Children was a very different piece of work. We designed a new campaign to encourage and help young mums to sing and talk and play more with their babies. Previous campaigns have been very instructional and educative, and the work that we did used co-design specifically to make sure that we didn't fall into what we called the judgy trap of actually producing a campaign which came across as being judgmental towards these mums. The third one is Our Future Health, a huge program, the UK's largest ever health research program, where actually our work with harder to reach audiences was about making content accessible, a very different type of brief or piece of work, but with the same thread running through it. Finally, on the right is a piece of work we did for Brent Council, which was in relation to participation in physical activity, which is something we're going to be hearing about from the We Are Undefeatables campaign, where we had to use very specific techniques to make sure that we heard from people with all sorts of barriers to participation. And we had to use very special techniques to make sure that we heard from them from participating in the research and in the listening as much as in the physical activity itself. Finally, from Claremont, I wanted to put this on the screen. This is a one-page summary of our approach to co-design. This can be downloaded on our website in the resources section. We'd be very happy for other people to use it. This is a summary of our collab approach, where in essence, we focus on pulling together a range of experience and expertise and injecting that expertise into the design and rollout of the work that we do. Now, the blend of expertise will vary. It will always have some lived experience and representation from different audience groups in it, but the exact blend will vary. And this collab approach that we've tried to explain here in this one pager, which, as I said, you can download from our website, tries to articulate how to achieve that blend of expertise from project to project. I hope that gives a little bit of background on Claremont. Let's go take a pause because the recycling truck has decided to pull up outside the window. But that's enough about Claremont. I'm going to move now to, hopefully, if the technical gods allow us to a video pre-record of my interview with Stephen Bediako. So Steve, thanks for giving up your time all the way from California. I know we sent the questions ahead, so I hope they're okay, but we're just going to get straight into it if that's okay. Well, the first question relates to how we've actually titled this event. And we've called the event Not So Hard to Reach, because for me, it's just so clear that that is an outdated phrase, and it implies that the audience has made themselves hard to reach rather than the organizations failing to make themselves, the organization accessible and the organization relevant. And what do you think about that? And what's the role of language in particular?
Yeah, no, thanks, Ben. And just want to thank you and the team at Claremont for giving me the opportunity to contribute to this session. I think what you do is fantastic, and I'm glad to be of support. I mean, I think this whole kind of hard to reach stuff all comes from, you know, negative connotations, and like you say, it's all about language and the poor use of language. And so I think one of the things that I've learned actually spending time working in the US is that you can turn these things on their head, right? So, you know, if you're talking about like hard to reach, you know, you could reframe it and say, you know, undiscovered talent, right? Or talent with promise. You know, I mean, I'm pinching stuff in here, like friends who work in the space of supporting people who are leaving prison in the United States, especially in California. now the common language to refer to people who are leaving prison is returning citizens, right?
Wow.
Because they are citizens, they are still citizens, and they are simply returning. They're returning from where they've been. And so what that does is, you don't talk about you don't talk about ex-offenders, you don't talk about prisoners, you just talk about people who are returning citizens. And so I think what that says to me about hard to reach and about the way we use language is that we need to be really intentional about setting up a vernacular and a language for so-called groups who are not in our mainstream view, so that the language is respectful, is inclusive, and is glass half full. Another one that I've seen is how we talk about I actually despise this word of NEETs, not in employment, education, and training. Absolute shocking use of the English language. And again, I've seen the use of youth with promise, or young people with promise, right? I mean, it's just kind of changing it and just saying, look, every young person has some promise. Maybe the mainstream system that we work in hasn't been able to realize that promise, and so we need to do some extra work or some other work. But I think we just need to be really intentional around language. And as a comms expert, I think you can probably help with that.
Well, you know what? I'm just almost kicking myself that I haven't been beating the drum on what you just said for the last few years now. And it's funny, is it coming from over the pond? They just seem so very naturally optimistic in the way that they put things. I mean, it seems obvious now that for this type of challenge that we should look to America for the right language. I mean, is it simply because they're optimistic, or are they just ahead on these things? What's going on over there?
I think you're right. I think what I've noticed, and obviously America's a different place. It's 50 different states, right? So California is very different to Texas, and so California is particularly positive and optimistic, as you say. But I think what I have noticed is that there is a difference. Is that yes, there is a difference in terms of how you present and how you communicate, and always being glass half full. I don't know, I've not got any kids, but my understanding is that kids in America, I mean, at the age of 6 or 7, they're all being taught like performance and confidence classes and all this kind of stuff. Now, you could argue that that's not so good for our introverted children and whatnot, but that's probably another debate. But I think what does happen with that is that you do have a culture that looks for ways of framing things through a positive lens, and actually looks at, especially now, has started to look at questions of, how are you framing so-called, disadvantaged groups or groups that you want to support. Even again, I think there was recently quite a bit of outcry. The new mayor of New York used the language low-skill workers. And he was vilified for it, because actually what he meant was low wage workers, right? Or low paid workers. Now, if you're low wage or you're low paid, doesn't necessarily equate to being low skilled, right? Like our waitresses, our cleaners, our nannies, who are all typically low paid in our society. And again, that's a question for another day, but they are not low skilled. They are skilled at what they do. So I think there is something about, how in British culture we are maybe looking at our so-called challenging or more disadvantaged groups in our society, and just making sure that we're using positive, uplifting language to describe them. Because I know something, I don't want to be described as a NEET or as something else. I mean, and I wouldn't want my kids being described that. So I don't think there's anyone out there who wants their kids described as that, whether their kids are in education or employment or not. So why are we using this kind of language? It's just because it's easy for professionals working in the space to quickly categorize and understand something. But that doesn't mean that you should be using that language to communicate with people.
That's very, I knew we'd get loads of food for thought from you, Steve, and that's what we're getting. I'm going to hit you, we've got limited time, so I'm going to give you another real juicy question. I think people are starting to realize more that you can't put people into certain demographic homogenous boxes and expect them all to behave the same way. Talk to me about intersectionality, about how obviously people fit into an infinite number of boxes. Nobody's neat and tidy in one box, but that doesn't work for organizations and for marketeers who love to have everything neatly segmented. And demographics, ABC1 and all the rest of it are very convenient for the marketeer, but that ain't real life, is it? And there's harms to that. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, it's a difficult one, man. I mean, and I definitely don't claim to be an expert on intersectionality, but what I do know is that we as human beings are constantly evolving, and I feel becoming better at how we exist, right? I mean, let's control for the fact that we're destroying the planet and we don't want to pay people properly sometimes, but overall we're good. And I think what we've got to do from the perspective of kind of marketeers or comms and appreciating the fact that we are now so much more than an A1, a B1. It's just be really curious about that stuff and be prepared to want to analyze and understand the different permutations of people, and recognize that. And maybe some of this is about going back to some of those basic classifications that we've been using to categorize and understand people and say, well, actually, these need to be so much more sophisticated, right? Because, we have so many characteristics that define us. And in a way as well, most of us are, usually there's some ethnicity to us, usually there's some either perceived or real gender perception we have of ourselves. In some way or another, most of us, especially as you start to get older, are living with some kind of ailment or disability or illness. So I think we've just got to be more sophisticated and curious. I think we've got to work harder on that stuff. I think as well, what we need to see is, if people are working in marketing and comms and these spaces, we need to start seeing more diverse people being hired to work on this stuff, right? So, what I'm trying to say is that I don't necessarily have the answer, but I know that there are certain things that we can do that will help us get more sophisticated about how we build intersectionality into our comms work in a more effective way. So for me, one of them is just be more curious and be prepared to hear these stories, hear these different characteristics, hear people's different descriptors of themselves. Two, we need to hire more people with diverse and intersectional characteristics into communication roles, because they're going to help us to solve and develop the approach. And yeah, I mean, I can't think what else, but I think those two things are key. We've got to be more curious. We've got to be hiring more people into the work, and I think we've just got to be practicing. Right, we've got to be practicing. What does it mean to communicate intentionally to people who recognize themselves through a multitude of lenses? I think that's important. I think it's hard. I think it's especially hard if some of us have come of age in a time when all there really was white, black, male, female, whatever else. It's just well, no, things have evolved, and we need to respect that and engage with that. So that would be my response.
Steve, I know it's 8:30 in the morning. You've probably not even had your first or second cup of coffee. I just want to say thank you for the opening remarks for our event. We'll get the recording to you afterwards, and maybe we can follow up with you afterwards and take questions from people and forward them to you if they have any for you. But just want to wish you well and say thank you for opening the event with those remarks. There's so much food for thought. And thank you.
No, appreciate you, Ben, and yeah, hope you have a fantastic event. And yeah, again, thanks for the opportunity to talk, and love the work you're doing, and good luck with it all.
I think what we're going to try and do is move to our first talk from the team from We Are Undefeatables. Barbara, if you could get your slides queued up over there. Maddie, if you'd like to come on camera as well. And then hopefully I can resolve the video, resolve the scaffolding truck. We'll chuck some tomatoes at them or whatever we've got to do. And we might play that after we've had our 3 talks. We might give it another run. Let's see how we go. Maddie, Barbara, can you hear me okay? Can you speak and just check that we can hear you okay? You're on mute at the moment, Barbara. And can you come off mute, Barbara and Maddie?
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, sorry about that.
Very good. Sorry about that.
You can see the slides.
We can see the slides. We can hear you crystal clear. Over to you, please, Maddie and Barbara.
Thanks so much, Ben. Yeah, just to say, usually I'm the one having the technical difficulties, so I definitely sympathise with you there. So hopefully we won't have any. It would be a first, fingers crossed. Thank you so much for having us. This morning, myself and Barbara are going to talk you through how the We Are Undefeatable campaign inspires people living with health conditions to be more active based on deep audience understanding. Just move on to the next slide. So just to give you a little bit of introduction on the campaign itself, in case you don't know much about it or you haven't heard of it or seen it before, hopefully you have, but you may not have done. The campaign itself is a collaboration of 16 leading health and social care charities, and it's backed by expertise, insight, and significant national lottery funding from Sport England. So, I think my sound might be, is my sound in? A couple of notes. I'll keep going and let me know if it's still a problem. Maybe I'll just set my screen. So all of the charities for the campaign work together to develop the campaign and promote it amongst their respective audiences. I might just try popping my headphones in. I'm so sorry. It's always me. We'll get a new laptop. Is that working a little bit better? I'll just keep talking and then let me know if it's even worse. That's okay. So yes, as I said, all the charities work together. They promote the campaign to their audiences, and the aim of the campaign is ultimately to reduce inactivity amongst people who live with long-term health conditions. Our aim was very much to really understand our audience and create a unified voice about activity and reframe the current narrative out there about physical activity. So this really drove and enabled us to create an emotionally engaging marketing campaign to reach those audiences and then subsequently drive that behaviour change in a sustainable kind of way. So the campaign itself actually launched back in August 2019. We did a very kind of big, high profile, above the line launch, which had a TV advert, paid social media, radio. We did various activity in GP surgeries. And then we backed that up with significant PR activity as well. So we did a big PR launch. So hopefully because of that, I'm hoping that quite a significant number of you did see it. It was a huge success at launch, and we have been developing, refining and responding to the changing environment ever since the launch of the campaign. So the first round of insights that we commissioned was in 2016 from Britain Thinks, and this set us on our journey with a physical activity programme that was later named Movement for All. That research particularly sparked an interest in us exploring some shared physical activity messaging to help us move away from the unhelpful messaging about activity that we saw was very prevalent amongst our charity partners. With things such as 150 minutes of a week of moderate intensity activity, which came from CMO physical activity guidelines. And really that meant nothing to anybody who was inactive, and worse, it was actually really off-putting for people that live with long-term conditions. So we had to get a whole new group of partners involved on the journey of what to do with this research insight. And straight away, the marketing directors of all the charities got really excited about the potential of where we could take this. And then this led us to do more research in 2018, which would help inform the messaging of the campaign and to really understand who we were talking to today. So from that research, we found that 43% of people live with at least one long-term health condition. And I think it's safe to say that since COVID, that number is probably relatively higher than that. We know that you're 2 times more likely to be inactive if you live with a health condition compared to someone who doesn't. We know that regular moderate physical activity has been shown to help prevent or manage over 20 chronic conditions. And we also found from the research that it's really important who delivers the messaging around physical activity to this particular audience. When you look at campaigns like This Girl Can from Sport England, that's, that works very well when you're talking to a group of women, but actually when you're talking to people who live with health conditions, having an organisation like Sport England doesn't really land that well. So for it to come from these charities that really understand their audiences, it's going to land. I'm sorry, I feel like I can see loads of chat messages coming up saying you can't hear me very well. Not sure how bad it is and whether I should keep going. Do you think, Barbara, should I keep going? Or?
I'm just having a look.
I think I've only really got probably just the video next.
It's just you could try turning off your video and maybe holding your mic up to your mouth a bit more. It might help you. It's not too bad most of the time, and we can obviously see the points on the slide. Anyway,
honestly, I can't believe this. I usually have video issues, and I've never actually had a sound issue.
I think everyone will understand.
This is a first. Terribly sorry about that. Hopefully, there's enough information on the slides.
Keep going.
Keep away from that. So the last point, just to say, is what we also found from the research was that physical activity can prevent up to 40% of long-term health conditions, and that also will improve things like quality of life, manage stress, aid sleep, and reduce isolation. So all the things that everybody we all get from physical activity, but it just enabled us to talk to our audience in the best way that we could to resonate with them. Oh no, I thought that was the last big talking slide, so apologies if this again you can't really hear me. But so as I mentioned earlier, the campaign is delivered by 16 charities. And in turn, that means a lot of people, which is a great thing, but also it does make things, you have to organise and manage things as best as possible. So these are just some of the things that we do to work together collaboratively and to try and make the absolute most out of an amazing partnership that we have. So we make sure that we have regular workshops with our relevant charity leads. So for example, things like social media workshops, around campaign burst, digital workshops. That's speaking to the particular people within charities who lead on those particular areas. And we can work really closely with them. So based on the different conditions. We also have regular meetings with the marketing directors from each of the charities to talk about their campaign plans and really involve people at a higher level to the actual planning of the campaign. So less of the execution and more of the strategy and the long-term strategy. We also create activation plans. So within our team, we put plans together that charities can fill in for their particular areas where they can talk about how they're activating the campaign, particular times of year that work particularly well for them. And they can sort of make it clear to us where sort of they can put the most of their efforts into particular campaign bursts. We also have regular sort of meetings around learnings, so sharing the learnings from each of the campaign bursts from the campaign team, but also cross-charity as well, so they can all learn from each other. As you can imagine, with 16 major charities, there's so much expertise there. It's really great for everyone to learn from each other. We make sure that all the charities are very heavily involved in the campaign development. So a couple of examples there are casting, so the people who actually feature within the films, and also the messaging as well. It's really important that is the tone of voice is correct and appropriate, which leads on to the next point where we really kind of lean on charities just to make sure that everything we're saying is appropriate and that we're reaching their respective audiences in the best way and in the right way. It's very important that we're not sort of pushing messages that might work for one condition don't necessarily work for another. So we very much work We have the lead charity, Age UK, obviously where I work the team that I'm in, and that means that we can, collate everything, we can manage all the feedback, manage all the plans and updates, and that really helps so many people who kind of need that and take that on. And then finally, just making sure that we have appropriate case studies for all the conditions and condition agnostic case studies as well. So as I mentioned earlier, we have our sort of major TV campaign, which is much more broad, reaching to a broader audience and trying to sort of depict, any kind of long-term condition, whereas it's really important to have specific case studies that charities can use their audiences that are really, really going to resonate, because their audiences can see themselves in this. And then next slide, please. Hopefully I can be quiet. And then any excuse from me to share some of our creative. So I just wanted to play our 30-second film. This was created last summer. So this is some new stories that differ from the launch stories. And this is reflective of people with a variety of different conditions. And you can kind of see all the ways that they like to get physically active that work for them and work for their condition.
It takes such an effort to shuffle 6 feet to a door, but show me a football.
Dancing helps me manage my condition.
After surgery, I was worried about going swimming because I thought that my implants would go floating away. I'm out of breath now.
In my recovery, the family joke became who would talk first, me or my granddaughter Olivia.
One little advantage, when I get hit, I don't feel a thing.
Find ways to move more at weareundefeatable.co.uk.
Thank you. Well, at least the video worked. That's a plus. So I will move away now from being the painful side of trying to talk on the mic, and I'll pass over to Barbara, who's hopefully the microphone's working slightly better.
Thanks, Maddie. Don't worry, you had some nice supportive messages. So hopefully my voice is coming across a bit clearer, but we did get most of that, don't worry. So I'm Barbara. I lead all of the campaign insight and evaluation. I just wanted to touch on a few points about how we engage with the target audience, which is an audience engagement has been completely critical from well before campaign launch, because we simply feel we can't be authentic at all without it. As you've just seen in the ad, the heroes of the ad are real people. We hear them talk, they share their own stories. And we're not shying away from showing their ups and downs either. But behind those visible campaign heroes, there's been an army of other heroes with whom we engage continually, to make sure that the campaign is going to resonate broadly, and that we strike the right tone. And there are a number of ways we do that. So one of the key ways is by conducting online research communities, where we bring together people who have different health conditions. We have exploratory discussion topics where we talk to them about things like general barriers to physical activity, but it's also a facility for us to test out campaign ideas, explore response to campaign assets. And we've learned a lot about how to run those communities successfully, and we've gained a huge amount of insight from those. But beyond that, we've also conducted frequent quantitative tracking, representing samples representing all different health conditions, of course. And we always have a portion of interviews that are done face-to-face, even though that costs more and takes more time. But we want to be as inclusive as possible in our research, because the campaign is a very inclusive campaign. It is really important for this particular target audience, because there are certain profiles of people that you just don't find very easily on online research panels. But there have been times where we've recognised a need for a bit of a deep dive into an underrepresented audience to gain more insight. So, for example, we've done some dedicated work with people living with dementia, and that required a separate strand and a particular approach. And we've also done some work with people who are digitally excluded, because we know that they over-index among our target audience. So sometimes those needs crop up and we will address them separately. And there's just been an enormous amount of learning from those kinds of activities. And perhaps it might seem challenging that essentially our target audience is not that hard to reach. It's 43% of the population, but it's so multifaceted in terms of the number of conditions and the different demographics. But from quite early on, we were able to establish some guiding principles, some foundational principles that are enduring and that sit behind everything. And it's around things like having inclusive messages, regardless of condition and demographics. And part of that is delivered through the range of stories we tell, the range of faces we show, but it's also very much about language and imagery. For example, we avoid overly sporty language around fitness and things like that, because for this audience, it's about what you can do from whatever starting point you are at, which might be walking to the bus stop, for example. We've also constantly tried to combine inspiration with realism. So we've learned throughout our insight that conditions can be really unpredictable and symptoms can vary from day to day. So the narrative really speaks to that reality in everything we've done. And it's also about understanding that people can have quite different motivations around doing physical activity. The physical activity might not be the end focus. It might be about wanting to stay strong in order to play with your grandkids, for example. So these are the kinds of enduring campaign principles that we follow, but we've had to continually engage, particularly throughout the course of the pandemic, in order to stay relevant, to show relevant physical activity examples, and just also to remain tonally in tune with where our target audience have been at throughout that period of time. Just quickly, in terms of campaign impact, we know that people have really related to the campaign, but we've also seen a good level of claimed action being taken, whether that's starting or restarting physical activity, or gathering information about what to do. So 4 in 10 have done something. But it's also really helped to establish a brand new narrative that didn't exist before around inclusive physical activity, that it's not necessarily about running marathons, it's about doing what you can and doing a bit more if you can. And that narrative, it's great to see, has actually been seeded also at a local activation level now. So this is our final slide with a few key takeaways. I don't know if Maddie, do you want to attempt to talk through?
I can attempt. I'll try and keep it as brief as possible. Yeah, some of the key takeaways that we've learned over the past couple of years. We've found that collaboration and how you approach collaboration is really, really important. So by working together kind of in the way I guess I described on the slide earlier, we've really been able to achieve things that we never have been able to do otherwise. As I mentioned earlier about having a lead charity, that's been so crucial. So in our case, having the planning, the development and the execution of the campaign on behalf of all the charity partners. Otherwise, it would have been incredibly difficult with so many people. And we really kind of work to ensure that all our partners feel equally heard, but it means that we can sort of make really swift decisions and informed decisions. Then on creative, really important to keep developing your creative, keeping it fresh, having new case studies, just so that you've got as much out there for your audience to resonate with. And again, it just means by developing creative to respond to the changing environment. And obviously with COVID, a lot has changed and has had a real impact on our audience when it comes to physical activity. So this has been really key for us. Having charity partners really amplifies the targeting. So we can look at the campaign very much from a broader reach perspective as a brand, but it's really great to have all the charity partners pushing the messaging and creative in front of their audiences and targeting it in that way. It means really reaching people to speak to. Ups and downs of conditions. So our audience, we find, react really well to honest stories. You know, in order for us to be able to cover reality of what it's like for living with health conditions, trying to be active. And we've seen a really great response in showing that sometimes that works and sometimes it really doesn't work. We also try to be as honest as possible. And then finally, the faces of the campaign are absolutely key. So we've put a lot of work into our casting process to make sure that we're covering a broad range of conditions, lots of different activities, you know, ups and downs and everything. So it's quite a difficult task to get a suite of different stories and activities and conditions, but the faces that we use are really, really, really important. And we know that works really well. And we've seen the relatability of the campaign increasing over time. So those are the key takeaways for me, and I'll just pass over to Barbara.
Cool. Yeah, the last 2 points were I sort of touched on. So what we've learned through the engagement work we've done is that during times of real disruption like the pandemic, which disproportionately affected our target audience here, we learned we had to engage more, not less, because the mood changed, you know, a lot throughout that period. So to stay relevant and to resonate and to be to continue to have an impact and engage the right mood, we had to continually talk to members of the target audience throughout that period, in particular a couple of years ago, but ongoing as well. And then the final thought is around when you're doing research. I mean, I've worked in insight for more than 20 years, and I think it's really easy to default to sort of straightforward methods of data collection where you don't necessarily hear from particular pockets of society. And it's been really important for us to make sure that our insight is inclusive, that we specifically reach out to people that aren't normally heard in classic research, such as those who are digitally excluded, people with cognitive processing difficulties, and things like that. So we've made a particular effort to continually hear from a very broad range of people from within our target audience and to represent their views. And I think that's it for us for now. So we'll hand back over to Ben.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Maddie. One of my all-time favourite campaigns. Thank you, Maddie, as well, for persevering with the technical issues. I'd like to acknowledge the kindness of the people in the chat who've said, you know, keep going, Maddie. But thank you ever so much for that. You're going to be around for our quick Q&A. I'm going to move on now to the team at the Terrence Higgins Trust. Taku and Dominic, if you could please come onto camera and mic on. And Dominic, if you could try and share your screen, we'll move straight over to you.
Thank you very much. Let's try. So is that the right screen you're seeing?
We're all good. Thanks, Dominic.
Great. Okay. Well, I'm going to talk about our campaign, which is targeting Black African communities in the UK. Just a little bit of a background. HIV in the UK can affect everybody, but it is more likely to affect people from particular geographies and also gay and bisexual men. So we have two kind of key target groups for the National HIV Prevention Programme, which are gay and bisexual men and people from Black African communities. And of those two groups, to give you sort of an idea of the size, of the 4,139 people diagnosed with HIV in the UK in 2019, 41% were gay and bisexual men. And of the 1,559 heterosexual people diagnosed with HIV, 37% of those were Black African men and women. So those are our two key audiences. And we will be focusing on the Black African communities audience. Now, this group has lower levels of engagement, has lower access to services and poorer health outcomes than other groups. And this is exhibited by high levels of late diagnosis, and late diagnosis leads to poorer health outcomes, more damage is done to your immune system. So it is a really key measure. So we're seeing higher levels of late diagnosis, and we're seeing lower levels of testing within the Black African community, and lower levels of interventions such as PrEP, which can prevent you acquiring HIV. So we have lower levels of access to services and lower levels of information in this group. So this is why we are prioritising this group, and Black African ethnicities are underserved and often considered hard to reach. And the challenge of this campaign is to achieve equity in terms of engagement, access to services and health outcomes with the gay and bisexual men group, which is the other sort of cohort in the campaign. So thinking about how we go about doing this, the first thing obviously is to really understand and define your group. And in the UK, we're very fortunate because what used to be Public Health England and is now UK Health Security Agency, UK HSA, still getting used to that, are basically have the best epidemiological data in the world in this area. So they have a whole raft of information which comes from their HARS data set, which is in sexual health and HIV clinics. And this provides really a range of information, such as a range of ages at diagnosis, the country of birth, where people live in the UK, and prevalence rates, which help us understand who the audience are and help us define that. But crucially, once we've identified who the audience are, and a narrow definition is much better than a broad definition, but once we've defined who, we really need the insights in order to understand how to reach them. And that's really, really crucial. And we've done this over time, over a number of different ways, ranging from interviews, focus groups, quantitative research, ethnographic research, and also large surveys, population surveys. So we've got a lot of information, and also Terrence Higgins Trust has been delivering this campaign since 1999. I joined Terrence Higgins Trust to deliver the original, to work on the original delivery of the original national, it was called CHAPS in those days, Community HIV and AIDS Prevention Strategy. So we've also got a lot of history internally and knowledge of those communities internally. But we use that insight really to create campaigns which are meaningful and resonate with the communities. Now, I think one of the most important things to do is to understand the communities. And although the target group for the campaign is called Black African communities, it's important to understand that there isn't a Black African community. It's not a homogeneous group. It's rather like trying to target European people. You need to, target a much smaller group in a much smaller geography, with defined characteristics. So this is something which we really have been doing since 2016 when we got the campaign. It's understanding your community at a much smaller level than just the very large target audience of the campaign. And then also understanding different levels of need, different levels of knowledge, and respecting and understanding different cultures and people's different experiences across those communities. So again, it's really getting into the nitty-gritty of a community in order to create a campaign which speaks to that community. So we use the COMBI behaviour change model, which underpins the campaign. And that means that the COMBI is very simple. In order for there to be behaviour change, people need to have the capability, the knowledge and skills to implement the desired behaviour change. They need the opportunity, the social, interpersonal and physical environment to allow the behaviour change to happen. And they need motivation to create the behaviour change. So we combine this model with our insights in order to come up with what we hope will be successful interventions. And I think one of the challenges here is you have to be brutally honest. Quite often, quite often when you're writing a specification, you will write what you want to achieve, what the funder wants to achieve. But when it comes to delivery, it's got to be completely honest. You have to have a clear and realistic behaviour change goal. And the intervention needs to be specific for the target audience. And then you need to then prioritise the most successful intervention so that you're kind of optimising the efficiency of the programme. So those are our sort of underpinning principles and the model. And this is the challenge of reaching the Black African communities in the UK talking about HIV. So in 2016, there had previously been two separate campaigns. There was a campaign targeting gay and bisexual men, and there was a separate campaign targeting Black African communities. And in 2016, the Department of Health brought them together, and it was originally envisaged that they would be two separate campaigns. That's because the audiences were seen to be very different, and also the channels to reach them were seen to be very different. So there were mature and established in those days print routes into the gay and bisexual audience, but there were no Pan-African media channels to reach the target audience. As I say, it'd be rather like having a kind of a European, if you think of it that way, channel to reach all Europeans. So the other piece of the other challenge was that when we did some insight work and looked into this, the Black African media consumption patterns are very similar to the general population in that there is no Pan-African channel. So you would have to sort of, go into national newspapers and national media to reach them, and then that would obviously be very inefficient, and you'd be reaching the whole population. So those were some of the challenges. And the starting point really was to develop an inclusive co-creation process which prioritized the voice of the end user. So I think previously in development models, peer review had been a very important consideration, but that really had professionals in the area, whether that be in the health promotion professionals or clinicians, speaking on behalf of their audiences. What we wanted to do was go direct to the audience, and we did that really through the insights work, focus groups, and then user testing on surveys, pretty much every choice, to give us guidance as to where to go. So that's how we sort of started the development of the campaign. And we found that actually there was a narrative which both gay and bisexual men and Black African communities bought into and was acceptable, and was in fact the most acceptable, and that was to do with taking personal action. So we developed the campaign It Starts With Me, which is an umbrella campaign, and it has different stages throughout the year, and the main stage, which has become the biggest part of it, is National HIV Testing Week. So we're going to kind of focus a wee bit on National HIV Testing Week, because that's our biggest. Unfortunately, the campaign doesn't have enough budget to go out of home, for instance, all year. So we focus on our out of home around National HIV Testing Week. And we adopt a multi-channel approach, and it does include mainstream media channels such as out of home, but it's targeted in high prevalence areas, so that people in areas with a prevalence of a very high prevalence, which is over 5%, or a high prevalence, which is over 2%, that's where the out of home is targeted. Aside from the sort of the channel mix, the campaign is actually a program of work as well. So we have targeted social media advertising, which we'll look at in detail a little bit later. Also, we have a lot of PR, which goes into both national media and local media and targeted media. And we use macro and micro influencers. So macro influencers we have been very fortunate to have support from people like Prince Harry and the rugby player Gareth Thomas, and they reach a broad community. And then we use micro influencers on sort of narrower channels. So we've got sort of a big Nigerian footballer fan, or people who speak to smaller sections of the community but have authority within that community and a large following in that community. And then to support all that, we have 30 activation partners across England who actually are having face-to-face conversations with the target audience and offering HIV tests on the ground. So it's a true multi-channel approach. And so thinking a little bit about social media. So back in 2016, when the received wisdom was, this needs to be 2 campaigns, you won't be able to find a narrative which resonates with both communities, and there's no media which you can buy to reach Black African communities, we really focused, well, actually Taku, to give him credit, focused on social media. And with our starting point was looking really at any organization who were doing this well, and money transfer companies were doing this well, and they continue to do it well. And this is a screenshot from a World Remit campaign, which is or post, which is just from the last couple of weeks. So we kind of looked at how companies outside of health promotion were reaching the audience, and what we did was we built up detailed social media profiles for different audience groups. So put very simply, and Taku would explain this much better than me, but put very simply, supposing you want to reach men from Sierra Leone, you might target people who follow a famous footballer from Sierra Leone. So you really need to go down to that level of detail of what are the likes and preferences of your target audience. And then we build up profiles, and we continually refresh these insights into different groups. Now, Taku will talk about how that's becoming harder, because obviously targeting is much harder now on Facebook, and we're having to change our strategy. But that was the original strategy. We've now built up a community of 15,000 people, and essentially we're having to switch from profiles of people's likes to lookalike audiences. So that's where it's really useful to have a community who you can then use as a lookalike audience. just moving on to, oh, I beg your pardon, I'm actually finished and I'm going to hand over to Taku.
Thanks, Dom. Yeah, so building on from what Dom was talking about, so we've done insights, so I just want to maybe take you through some very specific examples of what we have delivered through this sort of process that we've been going about. So the first thing is, it starts with me, like Dom has already talked about, like, which starts with me. This is the campaign that we developed, which talks to all communities. So even though it's targeting both gay and bisexual men and Black African communities, what it does, it also has nuance of understanding. So for example, we know that when it comes to National HIV Testing Week, with gay men, most of the times we say there is HIV testing, they say where. When it comes to Black African communities, when we say there's HIV testing, they say why. So we know that in terms of our strategies of how we need to talk about things, we need to make sure messaging clarifies why they need to test, particularly like a lot more with Black African communities. It is less of a struggle with gay men. So it's about thinking about that. Dom, let's move to the next one, please. So, the campaign has grown over time. Like, so it's got an an average sort of campaign recognition of about 59%, and we've got sort of people who've expressed sort of a motivation to act as a result of a campaign. Of the campaign is about 70%, from the audience, and then some people who reported, this is self-reporting on taking an action, is like close to 60% on average. I have to say these figures are slightly lower than probably add 5% to each of those. They were affected by the period like with the pandemic. But one of the key things around this is we also have some other concrete things that we're measuring that we can directly attribute sort of to the campaign. So as part of the process, we actually provide people online test kits. So this whole thing of testing from home that we're seeing with COVID, we've been doing it for a very, very long time. So yeah, we've been doing it since 2015 with HIV. And so from 2016 to 2021, we've had people from Black African communities ordering 9,000 tests. And what is quite interesting about these tests is that the people who order from Black African communities on this line are exactly the people who need to be testing. What do I mean by that? We're talking about people who haven't tested in a long time, or people who've never tested before. And actually what we would call the reactivity rate, so like when people test and then we get a positive result, is higher, like within this particular cohort, which makes it an important sort of provision. However, we can't rely on only online activity. That's why Dom talked about the partnerships that we have on the ground for people to do face-to-face. For the face-to-face activity, we've managed to see about 32,000 people directly. And the main brief for the local activation partners is really to try to find those people who wouldn't be accessing things online. So it's been quite good on that front, as well as the number of people tested. The numbers have been fairly steady. One thing that I have to say is this is where it gets interesting. We spend more money on the face-to-face aspect, to do the tests, and the wisdom was, at some point, I think when we started, people said you shouldn't do it. This is where we have to be careful about the voice of the PA, like just as peers, without actually the insights of the audience. People were saying, well, we shouldn't offer online testing to Black Africans. They're not going to use it. But I can tell you the 9,000 test kits which have been delivered during this period have been delivered at a far, far less cost to do this, and they've got more people diagnosed. So from the actual behavioral outcome we're looking for, it's been successful. It's challenging, but it's been cheaper than delivering face-to-face. So it's just something for you to ponder about. Thank you. Next one, please. So one of the things that we've also picked up from HIV testing, there is a challenge around how to receive your test kit. So one of the key things that we've used is to try to make sure that with those insights, we adapt and optimize what we're doing. So we thought, well, why not do click and collect, which is one of Dom's key things here about adding click and collect into the service. So we developed a click and collect service, and this process involved actually talking to people, getting their ideas of how how they would like to receive the test kit, and also maybe just a campaign around it, which ended up with this idea of testing yourself for HIV needn't be a chore. And because it's so easy, you can order online. So what we did is a small campaign where we were just sending people a test kit with the option of either receiving it directly at home, or you can use it for, we had 4,000 click and collect pickup points that they could use. Next slide, please. So we did that, and what was interesting was, because we also, this same service, the click and collect, we did it with targeting even gay and bisexual men, just for comparison to see if there was an actual difference. And overall, we had a 10% uptake from the total test ordered of click and collect, but it was significantly higher amongst Black African communities, and particularly amongst Black African men. So when it comes to general testing trends, Black African men are much harder to convince to test as well. And so this became something which is quite important. And the issue of confidentiality, of course, was also then reflected in our evaluation. And so this is just an example about how we want to adapt for things. Next slide, please. One of the things also is to realize that those hard outcomes that we're talking about, those things that we're talking about, are part of a process for the audience that we're talking about. So one of the things is there is never one solution which works for everything. Testing is part of our interventions with the community, but actually we have a lot of work to do with addressing stigma within the community. So what we have done was to create an intervention where this is a, what do you call it, choose your own adventure style videos, where we've presented people with 3 stories, which are all interactive, where you choose your own adventure in a way. The first one is about whether it's, when do you tell somebody you've got HIV? It's something which is a big thing, which drives also quite a lot of the stigma within the community around HIV, and whether it's okay, you should always tell people you've got HIV or not. So these 3 stories were developed with people from the community living with HIV, as well as others without HIV, to try to develop these stories. And then they were sort of have been used in workshops and mostly promoted online. But what it does is, this is another angle of sort of viewing that within that particular community, sometimes there's no one solution for that particular community. Next slide, please. So this one, in terms of results, has been quite interesting. It's got huge engagement. One thing that I'll tell you about social media, for example, with our community, with Black African communities, quite often they'll click on something, but they don't comment, they don't like. They don't do anything. But with this particular campaign that we did, we actually had quite a significant number of interactions which were open, because, and that was important for us in this. We needed people to share, to talk about it, and it enabled that to happen, with HIV, which was a big change. Usually with some campaigns, they'll come privately. They won't come in public because they don't want to be seen. To be engaging with sometimes with stuff to do with HIV. But next slide, please. I think that would be the last one. But as sort of just to round up, the main thing is, like Dom said from the beginning, what is important for us is insights. We need to define the community. I'm a Black African person in the UK. Most of the times I have to tell people that I'm Zimbabwean because I'm not the same, just like as everyone who's from the Black African community. And this is a particular challenge for people in health promotion, because when they're given the overall stats, they're told about Black Africans, and then they forget about the nuance that we've got. We'll be around, I think, to answer any further questions. So I would leave it here. Thank you.
Thank you, Taku. Thank you, Dominic. Incredible work, inspiring work. I knew it would be good, and it is good and so insightful to hear about it. We've got loads of questions piling in. We're just trying to distill them down into and arrange them thematically, but we're going to come to that after we've heard from Julian Crockford from Villiers Park Educational Trust. Julian, you come on screen, you got your mic on. Do you want to try and share your screen? And And I will hand over to you to give us the final case study, the final talk of our session.
That's great. Thank you, Ben. Yeah, it's been brilliant hearing the preceding discussions, and I think what we do is probably different in the nature of what we do and in terms of the scale, but there were a number of resonances that came through to our work. So Villiers Park is an educational trust that works specifically with disadvantaged young people, and I know as we've gone through the session today, we've talked about the difficulties of using terms like disadvantage and hard to reach and some of the connotations that might come with that. So I can talk a bit more about that. But the trust, the Villiers Park Educational Trust, is a social mobility and education charity, and we're over 100 years old. So we had our centenary a few years ago. So we've been engaged in this work for a long time. And obviously we've changed as the world has changed, and the nature of the young people we work with change. But we have two kind of, I guess, primary focuses. One is to support disadvantaged and underrepresented young people to achieve their ambitions. But there's also a macro level approach as well, which kind of chimes with what we've been talking about, which is we recognise that the kind of the society we live in today, there is an overrepresentation of people of certain backgrounds, normally quite privileged, well-to-do backgrounds, in positions of influence and power, thinking about sort of politics and journalism and law. And what's not being represented is the voice and the experiences of underrepresented and disadvantaged people. So part of what we do is empower young people and help them develop their voices and a platform so that they can hopefully move forward and become part of the discussion further down the line. So the immediate focus is on our work with young people, but then we've got this kind of macro level goal as well. And we do that through a modular program, Future Leaders, and there's a number of components of that. We work with young people. Each young person we work with gets a coach. We've got a bespoke coaching model that we use to help young people focus on what matters to them, what their purpose is, and we build everything from that very individual sense of commitment and values. And we also have a lot of opportunities for the young people to work together on collaborative projects, change-making projects in their community or in their schools that impact on their peers. So it's a kind of a wider impact. And we also have a number of resources and courses and other bits of the programme which are designed to help young people recognise the skills, attributes and behaviours they need and develop them. But we're very it's a non-directive approach. So we provide the framework and the platform for young people, but it's up to them which bits they engage with and what their goals are. So that's a kind of shift for us. Traditionally the charity was focused on getting disadvantaged and underrepresented young people into university, and our goals have expanded, and now it's, we want young people to achieve their ambitions, whether that's going into employment, apprenticeships, further education, higher education, whatever. So we're kind of agnostic about the end goal. We also have another strand of work that we do, which is we work with organisations in terms of knowledge exchange opportunities. Predominantly that's been with universities so far. So we do a lot of work with universities to help them use and develop their evaluation approach and to use evaluation to think about their delivery as well. We also support some corporate organisations, or we're moving into supporting corporate organisations with understanding more about the benefits of working with disadvantaged and underrepresented groups and young people that may not fit their kind of traditional idea of what they might be looking for in employees. And I'll talk a bit more about that appreciative approach in a moment. So that's us. As I sort of said at the beginning, we're probably a little bit uncomfortable with the term disadvantaged, and it's it's the same with a lot of these terms. It can be imposed on people. It might bring in kind of conceptual baggage that don't fit people's experiences, and so the search is still on for a kind of a term that we're more comfortable with. If you do have any ideas, please do put them in the chat. We'd be very grateful. But in terms of when we talk about disadvantage, we're thinking of kind of two sort of key areas really. One is actual material disadvantage, so economic poverty, and obviously we're seeing more and more of that unfortunately as we go through, and the knock-on effects that will have in terms of health, young people's ability to develop their ambitions, to progress into education or whatever they want to do. Maddie and Barbara talked about long-term health conditions. Obviously disability is another area where people can find the view is that they might experience barriers or blocks to getting to where they want to be. We also focus quite a lot on young people in the care system or about to leave the care system, and obviously their experience is different to young people that may not have come through the system in the same way, and they can have, you know, disrupted education, they can move around a lot, it can impact on their kind of social network, and also young people who care for family members or other people around them, and that's something that will take up a lot of their time and actually take away from the time they have to be a young person. Another kind of areas that is the less material elements of disadvantage, but which nonetheless have a significant impact on a young person's experience in the world. We're very aware that young people will, or everyone has a different form of different forms of social and cultural capital, and if someone's cultural environment or cultural thinking doesn't match predominant models, then they will find themselves, you know, potentially othered, may not fitting in, and and I'll come back to this in a moment when I talk about sort of the structural challenges we face. Young people also have kind of diverse experiences and identities, and if they're minoritized against, with the people around them or the people in an organization or a particular context, then they will, they run the risk of being othered, developing imposter syndrome, and all of these things can impact on their ability to take advantage of the opportunities available to them. And another term that's kind of quite complexly for us woven in to disadvantages, underrepresentation. And I guess that's drawn particularly from working with universities, where we know that the university population is quite different to the wider population, and certain groups of people are underrepresented in higher education. And that's what we draw on when we think about the kind of macro level goal, which is who's represented in decision making and influencing positions, and what does that do to the kind of decisions they make. So I mentioned one of the things that really informs our thinking in terms of working with the harder to reach and disadvantaged young people we work with is this kind of the challenge of I think is not falling into the trap of thinking in terms of deficit models, but instead thinking more about the kind of structural social models. And I was really taken, Ben, at the beginning when you were talking about the work you do with Save the Children, and you talked about the importance of co-creation with disadvantaged mothers, and the risk of becoming judgy, and it can become sort of a bit finger wavy, and yeah, I think that's that's something that is we're always aware of. For many of us who work in this bit of the sector and who are involved in working with young people, there is a kind of an ethical imperative that drives us. We want to see greater equality. We want to see more young people being able to achieve their ambitions, but there is a risk of falling into a sort of missionary approach where we offer the solution and you just need to change and become like us. And obviously that's a really unhelpful way of approaching it for everyone, I think. So we kind of think of disadvantage, it's not an individual characteristic, it's not a characteristic of a person, but it's a structural effect. So we've drawn on sort of a lot of thinking that's been lots of thinking around disability, and how it's not a disability that impacts on someone, it's the inability of the wider society or the structures to make space for them and to work for them. So disadvantage is not a problem of a person, it's a problem of the structure and the culture. So we're trying to move away from this idea that I guess sort of persisted, particularly in discussions around higher education in previous decades, which is, we'll just change people to fit. So we just need to make you fit, our traditional idea of what a kind of middle class student is, rather than changing what we do or how we approach things. And as I said, the ultimate goal is to enable diversity in influence and in decision making, that those structures change and are themselves more diverse. So the other kind of areas that we kind of draw on are things like universal design in education, the idea that you don't want to be changing your pedagogy or your resources to accommodate particular sets of needs. It's important that materials are support students with dyslexia, for example, but the ideal is to make sure that when you design things, you don't put any of these, you address all of the potential needs there are as you're designing it, so you don't have to accommodate different kinds of difference. The other sort of characteristic of our approach is an appreciative approach to the young people we work with, and this goes back to the difference between deficit models and social models. If we're looking at young people of a view of, well, this is what an employer wants, this is what the university wants, we will judge their forms of cultural capital as in a deficit way compared to the norms and mainstreams. Whereas part of what we're doing is working with young people, helping them appreciate and valorize their own diversity and what that brings. So different forms of thinking, different forms of experiences will all help any organizations they work with, or will help their communities actually empower them to valorize the strengths they have through that diversity. And the other kind of area that we think about is around identity issues. So where young people feel kind of minoritized in a context, whether that's on the basis of class or income or ethnicity, the tendency is for that then to be internalized, and for young people to feel they have to do a lot of identity work to fit in. So this goes back to the kind of, almost absorbing and internalizing a deficit model whereby they feel obliged to change or to appear to change to fit in with the dominant mode. And that's a huge cognitive load for people to have to manage their identities all the time. And in terms of education, that can be a real distraction from actually the learning and the development that they're trying to do. So we've talked about diversity. I think this came through very strongly in both of the presentations we've had so far, which is diversity is actually really diverse, and there's a real risk of homogenizing when we talk about different groups of young people. And what we find in our work with young people is that they're actually really, complex, they're heterogeneous. Every single young person we work with is an individual. And it's, if we try and group them or impose a label or identity on them, we're doing a massive disservice to them, and we're not reflecting the holistic complexity that each young person has. So what we try and do is rather than think in terms of labels or identities or assume that particular groups of students have needs, we try and be agile. We try and kind of build everything as flexibly as possible, so young people themselves can adapt what we offer to their own needs. And I think the key element of that is when we're trying to reach young people and work with them and support them properly, is that we have to always, the most important thing for us is to listen and learn from young people and question our assumptions. We've talked a lot about the importance of co-design and co-creation. A lot of us in the charity are, twice, 3 times as old as the young people we work with. We don't have any idea of what their lived experience is. And the only way that we can help them is to listen to them and understand how they see the world, what their experiences are, and ask them to help us design the things that will most help them. So just a kind of quick note of how we reach disadvantaged young people and how we support them. As I said, one of the things we do is we prioritise an appreciative approach, which is about helping the young people we work with recognise the strengths and the attributes that are inherent to them, and they don't feel the need to kind of apologise for their diversity or their different experiences or their different sets of cultural reference. We help them realise that that's a real strength and something that needs to be celebrated, and other, you know, we need to help them help other people to recognise those strengths and attributes. We take a collaborative partnership approach, and again, that's come through really strongly today, the importance of working with and not doing to the people that we work with and support. We do a lot of work to listen and embed the voices of our beneficiaries and to understand their experience, and that's been particularly important during the COVID pandemic. Everything changed for young people. We saw higher rates of mental ill health. Digital poverty became much more of an issue than it had been before because we were all moving online. So it was really important for us to kind of keep in touch with the beneficiaries directly or through practitioners and the coaches and our delivery staff who work closely with young people see it on the ground. So we tap into as many different perspectives as we can to help us kind of keep in touch with how young people are experiencing their lives and where we can add most value. And again, you know, we talk about creating comfortable spaces for diversity. So we empower, well, hopefully the aim is to empower young people to be comfortable in themselves and to feel that they're in a safe space with the charity and the work we do, so they can be themselves and they can celebrate themselves. And again, it's, you know, it's a collaborative approach. It's kind of not relying on assumptions or rules of thumb about what young people are like. It's allowing young people to exist in their individual contexts and with their individual priorities, values, and goals, and allowing them to focus on those. And thank you very much. I've tried to be quick so we've got some panel time.
Julian, thank you ever so much for that. It's just, I'm in awe of your experience and all of our speakers, the experience of the people that we've heard from. Speakers, if I could ask you please just to put your cameras on, and we're going to take some questions. We've had a very busy Q&A in the Q&A function on Zoom. We've also been doubling that up. We've got stuff going on in the chat as well. My colleagues have been distilling some of that down. Before I ask my first question, which will go to you, Barbara, I just wanted to say just two themes that I've observed. One is a recurrent thing that I heard is the emphasis on not doing stuff for people, but doing stuff with people. You know, co-design and co-production, it looks to me, are becoming standard practice, are becoming the default thing to do, not as an option to take if as a discretionary thing. But there needs to be a darn good reason why you wouldn't do it, you know, rather than and include it in your formative research and your formative design, and as actually as an ongoing thing. The second and final observation from the three speakers that we've heard is that I think you put it nicely, Julie. You said diversity is really diverse. You know, this thing that is very convenient for us marketeers to put people in a neat box, but it isn't. That's not real life. It's actually counterproductive. It can be offensive. It can be ineffective. This issue of treating people as individuals and of having at least a appreciation of intersectionality and the fact that people do not fit neatly into boxes, while being complex and making things more complicated for us as marketeers, is real life. And if we want to be effective, we need to have a grasp of that. Those were just the two themes that I took out of this, but we have had some excellent questions. I'm going to move to Barbara. I think I sent this to you on the direct message already, Barbara. Barbara, we had this excellent question from Sophie Decker from CR UK. The question is, what did you do in particular with digitally excluded audiences? You did touch upon this in your talk actually already, but how did you manage, how did you include people who are digitally excluded? What was your thinking around that point?
Well, there are, I guess, a few points to make there. We knew from a previous literature review that digital exclusion was relatively high among our target audience, about one in five, something like that. So we decided to do some dedicated research on this, a series of depth interviews with digitally excluded members of our target audience. It was made more urgent by COVID because we felt that COVID had really magnified the digital divide, that there were so many online resources that they weren't potentially having access to. So we did this dedicated research to understand their circle of influences and if there were any sort of key differences we needed to account for. And that, yeah, a number of things came out of that, in particular the need for physical resources, which the campaign provides, such as the We Are Undefeatable leaflet, which contains a pull-out accessible poster with exercises on that you can do, and a variety of other things that have also now been developed. But in our ongoing research as well, our quantitative tracking also includes a face-to-face component alongside online sampling. And it's always just been really important that we don't take our eye off the ball there, that we really do represent the full spectrum of our audience in that respect.
That's really very, very useful. I mean, we're aware that even doing this event on digital means that there may be people who are less likely to participate. Thank you, Barbara. If there's further questions about digital exclusion, I think it's a really hot issue. Please, everyone, feel free to put them into the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. And our panelists, Barbara, and also the rest of our panelists will answer your questions if they can. I'm going to please move to Dominic with another question that we received. Actually, it was from Ruth Evans. She didn't frame it as a question, but I think it is a very good question. Ruth's comment to everyone was, there's a clear message in your talks to think small in terms of community engagement. However, I wonder how this works when you want to create population level messages and you have to meet cost effectiveness expectations. Dominic, that's a tricky technical one, but you've got the 25 years experience in there. Over to you.
Yeah, I mean that is, and I think it kind of comes back. You need to have clear objectives to start with, know what you're trying to do. So, for instance, for the National HIV Testing Week campaign, that needs to be, by definition, a national campaign, and needs to reach more than just our two target audiences. So the challenge there was really to find something which resonated across society, really. And actually, what we did there, and it comes back to co-creation, was first of all we tested a lot of options, and we use that an awful lot of options. We use focus groups to surface issues, and then we use quants to really get the answers. But one of the creative concepts that came up was give HIV the finger. Now that was not liked by the peer group. It was seen to be a bit frivolous. People were worried that not every HIV test is a finger prick test, and they would really, if we'd have left it to the peer group, that would not have gone forward. But when we tested it with different population groups, it was over 20% more successful than any other route. People really liked the fact that it had a kind of a bit of a cheeky feel. It had a double meaning. It gave a visual action. It was positive. So we found the trick is to try and find something which is very hard, which resonates across all your audience. Then, if your objective is to create an intervention which addresses, a particular need. So in terms of the HIV testing, HIV self-testing for Black African men, then we had the insight that there were different, that people living in families or with other people in their household were very hesitant to have a package, even if it was plain, delivered to their house. So we were able to develop a click and collect service, and that was based on kind of specific insights within a target audience. So it really comes back to your objective. The interesting thing about the national program is that we now have license in our new contract, which we're very happy to win last December. So that's 3 more years. We had the opportunity to do smaller pieces of work with subpopulations. So previously the campaign really was a national campaign, and we were trying to come to messages which resonated across all our audiences. But now we're able to do more targeted work because as HIV rates fall, we need to work kind of more closely with communities where there's high rates of prevalence. So we will be doing more targeted work and not necessarily worrying about messages which resonate with everyone. I think the other thing we do is we use within the national program, we use this macro and micro influencers. So most of our out of home, we had kind of Dr. Ranj has been our poster boy for a couple of years. He's highly acceptable across all our audiences and in the general population. He's also free. So that means that, you know, it out of home, that's appropriate. But when we get into social media, we use much more micro influencers, people from communities delivering the same message, but with authority in that community. Just one thing I want to pick up on digital exclusion, which is a really hot topic. But at Terrence Higgins Trust, you know, we're a national charity, but we don't have very many service centres. So, you know, if you're not near a service centre, you are excluded. If you can't come to our service centre. So, I think it's important to remember that I've just checked on that on Ofcom, and in most population groups up to the age of 55. 99% of people have access to a smartphone. It falls at the age of 55 to 95%, and by the time you get to 75 years old, it's 75%. But you are able to reach that proportion of the population, whereas if you're delivering a physical service from a service centre, you are able to reach only those people who can actually come to that service centre. So I know it's a really important issue, but there are huge opportunities there as well.
There are. Thank you, Dominic. It's so useful in an event like this just to be able to root around in some of the detail here, some of the technicalities you mentioned about using qual to service the issues and then quant to back things up. I think some of this method is gold dust to practitioners. I'm very, very grateful for that. I've got one question I would like to put to Julian. It wasn't from an individual, but it was in relation to something that you said, Julian. I think you were picking up on something that I said. It was about this thing about avoiding and preventing the judgy trap. And, you know, this somebody else may have mentioned, or you, about othering, you know, and about that is a trap. And could you expand a little bit on that? Because I've got the impression that it was a priority for you to prevent that happening. How do you do it? What are the rules of thumb or guidance that you might give for 150 people watching this to prevent the judgy trap?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, prior to working for Village Park, I used to work at a university evaluating the impact of outreach. And during the time I did that, we did, I think that's where the recognition sort of developed. And there was a sort of, you know, the old approach was, you know, we need to change these poor kids to fit into universities, which tend to be more middle class. And I think there was a kind of a gradual awareness, and as a sector, as we spoke to young people, we sort of, you know, kept having evidence of, you know, people saying, well, I don't really feel I belong here. This isn't for me. I don't see people like myself, you know, and that kind of sense of fit and belonging is crucial to success in a university setting. And I think we saw that as well as, you know, in the charity work and working with young people. A lot of young people we work with have to do a lot of identity work themselves to fit in, either because they're in they're in an under-resourced school without, you know, and most of their peers don't have the same kind of ambitions. So they kind of have to hide their ambition and what they want to achieve. So what we try and do is help, is to flip the perspective. So rather than asking young people to judge themselves against an external, we ask them to focus inwards and look at their own attributes and skills and actually start seeing how they can make a positive difference in the world because of what they offer. And that then enables us to get away from this kind of, oh, there's this right model. You all have to look like this to succeed. It's, you know, this is you, this is who you are. You have your own power, you've got your own potential. You need to ignore everyone else who tells you that that's not, you know, not right or that's wrong. And, you know, we help young people build up their strength and their confidence in their own capacities. Yeah, sorry, that's a very waffly answer.
Not at all, not at all. It's inspiring. I think, you know, this message about empowerment and agency has come through all of the three presentations that we've seen. I'd like to finish on time. The time has gone by very quickly. I'd like to once again say thank you to Barbara, to Maddie, your heroic efforts. I think a lot of the people in our Q&A were feeling your technical pain, but you did great, you did good. It's the substance of what you're saying came through. Taku, it was for your insight and for the obvious passion for what you're doing, and Dominic, similarly, for all of this experience. I mean, all of what we've, the panelists that we've had, I'm very, very grateful. I will probably be told off by colleagues if I don't give a plug to our next event, which will be, I'll just put it on the screen here, hopefully that will work. Our next event is called Behind the Curtain. 8 behaviour change experts from around the world will be pulled together to reveal the top tools, tricks and tips for 2022. We're going back to our roots a bit with our behavioural insight, behavioural science work with this event. That'll be on the 24th of May, similar time. We haven't got the registration up yet, but you can email us if you'd like to pre-register for that. We didn't have time for the interview with Stephen Bediako, with regret. We're going to put a link into the chat now. It will be all over our social media. I would implore you to watch it. He's an amazing person. He's pulled out the themes of what we were talking about today. We're 1 minute over. Thank you ever so much, everybody. Have a wonderful day, and thanks for joining us.